All right, hello everybody. How's it going? Welcome to Comic Book Radio. I'm your host, Peter Cimetti. This is episode 221. Tonight, my guest is James SZUBSKI, and we're going to be talking about cryptids, UFOs, portals, and more, believe it or not, in the Columbia River Gorge. And it's an interesting topic, not just because I'm really interested in it, but because it is just... He's had over 300 accounts because of the fact that he's over there and people have reported him, and I can only imagine. As you guys know, this is an esoteric Saturday. We also call them supernatural Saturdays. So I'm going to have a couple guests on within this month and next month and maybe some more months to come that are going to have some level of expertise in these fields. Not just a discussion about, do these things happen? Can these things happen? What are our thoughts? But actually talking with people who have quite a bit of experience with all of this stuff. Because for me, I don't know if I've experienced things. I mean, I have, but I don't know was that actually a thing in the woods, or was that actually a thing I saw, or was that actually a thing I heard, or I don't really know. I mean, I guess we all don't really know. But I'm excited to talk to James tonight about this stuff because I think it's a fun topic, it's an important topic, and I love exploring the unknown. And I know you guys love hearing about this stuff too. So before I bring him on, I just want to say hello to those of you in the chat. We got Spicer McLeroy commenting earlier today. Says, woo, finally, CBR is back. And that's because I've only had maybe one or two shows in the past 3 weeks. So what a great show to kick things off. Says, have a great show, Brother Pete. Welcome to CBR, James. Best of luck to you both. Dale Snyder is here too. And is just saying, Nessie, Bigfoot, the Greys, giant octopus? I think that's like Billy Joel's next We Didn't Start the Fire, right? Citizen Ronan, what's up? Hope you're doing well. Thank you for being here. What Geeks Do Network? How's it going, man? Good to see you. We got Ben in the chat as well, too. What's up, Ben? Hope you're doing good. Steve, I am one. What's up, Steve? Hope you're doing well. Brian Suddenly Old is here, too. How's it going, Brian? Good to see you. We got Cole King in the chat, too. How's it going, Cole? Buddha Bear is here too, says, now this is a Polish name I can get behind. Oh boy. And I did talk to James before the show, so I did pronounce his name correct. That was very important to me. I like to pronounce people's names correctly. Brian says, I'll catch the replay. All right, well, thank you for stopping by, being here, and it's going to be a good replay, so I do hope you catch it. What's up, Kier? Hope you're doing good. Thank you for being here, brother. Good to see you. All right, so before I bring James on, a little bit about James. Now, he's a nationally certified search and rescue EMT, wildland firefighter, and decorated U.S. Army infantry veteran. So we're going to be discussing tonight a wide array of paranormal activity in the Columbia River Gorge, including the Kit-Kat Ape Cat. When I first read that, I thought it was the Kit-Kat Ape Cat. I was like, man, marketing's getting crazy with these companies. Coming up with cryptids. The Kit-Kat Ape Cat. But it's the Kit-Kat Ape Cat. I gotta learn about that. I gotta learn. It's like this panther ape creature over there. Monster Mountain is a really interesting place. I know a bit about Monster Mountain, but I'm sure James knows far more. Sasquatch, UFOs, portals, small humanoids too. I'm really looking forward to seeing what kind of small humanoids. I've said this before on the show. Humanoid things, I think among anything else, creep me out the most. Even on Unsolved Mysteries back in the day, when the drawing would be of an alien or a being or whatever, and it would kind of look human. Like the features were a little that always wigged me out the most. So I'm really curious as to what kind of small humanoids are in the Columbia River Gorge over in Washington State. Anybody near that region in the chat? I wonder. I wonder. All right, so I am going to bring on James here, the man of the hour. Please give him a big comic book radio welcome, Mr. James SZUBSKI. What's up, James?
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Good to have you. I'm excited for this conversation tonight.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
Now, can I get a little bit of background on yourself in terms of how you got into all of this?
Sure, yeah. So about 3 years ago, my mother-in-law passed away, and she had a number of businesses down here in the Columbia River Gorge. My wife and I and my family, we were living up near Seattle, and the Columbia River Gorge is sort of the boundary between southern Washington State and northern Oregon State. And so she passed away, and we decided to come down and run the family businesses. One of them was a store. And you had mentioned some of my outdoor adventure experience, between being in search and rescue and wildland forest firefighting and being an infantry soldier. And so I love this kind of stuff. And we were able to take one of those businesses and sort of change the format a little bit into an outdoor adventure store. And just sort of on a whim almost, I put a Sasquatch in the logo of Margie's Outdoor Store. Margie was my mother-in-law's name. And right away, people started coming in and telling us some really incredible stories about the things they were encountering in the wilderness areas around here. And so because of some of the experiences I've had and some research I've done on paranormal topics, I recognize that there may be some truth to this. And so, and plus I'm super interested in it. So we put up a big sign in the window that said, "File paranormal reports here." And I gave the employees really specific instructions. I said, we are going to take everyone who comes in with an unusual story seriously. We're going to treat them with dignity and respect. We're going to ask intelligent follow-up questions. We're not going to try to insert what we believe they saw into their story. We're just going to take in the data and see where that leads us. So that was about a little more than 2.5 years ago. And we now have had over 350 reports, as you mentioned in the introduction. Yeah. It's and so if you think about it,
in just 2.5 years,
yeah. And so there's a couple ways that people file reports. Obviously, people come in the store all the time, and we've got forms that people fill out. So some of those are filled out forms. A lot of people just want to tell their story to someone who's not going to tell them they're crazy. And then we've got at margiesoutdoorstore.com. We've got the paranormal reporting forms online. And we do some stuff on Facebook as well, and so we get some reports through there. And then I've become pretty well known in the Gorge, and people will stop me in the street or at the grocery store or at a restaurant and say, "Hey, James, I know that this stuff you're interested in. Let me tell you about this experience I've had." And it has just been phenomenal. Like, it's almost like every 2 or 3 times a week, a new Scooby-Doo mystery walks through our front door, and we get to go, check it out and, talk to these people. And the amount of information that we're gathering is really remarkable. And so that's,
are you noticing a commonality or a pattern to any of this stuff? Like, does it happen? Like, is like weather a factor, day, night, the moon phases, anything like that?
Well, that's one of the big things that we do. So when you get a lot of reports, a single report is an interesting data point, but it's not really enough for us to get super excited about something. We like to look for patterns or repeated type of stories or similar features and things like that. And so we do notice some patterns. There are some areas that are certainly more active than others. But and then there are certain creatures like this Klickitat ape cat, which we had never heard anything like it before. Yeah. And we now have well over 100 reports of that creature alone.
Wow.
And so as we start to build up the knowledge base about that, it becomes more and more interesting. Recently, we started a paranormal group here in the Gorge. Our first meeting, we had 45 folks show up. I was really impressed at how many people were interested. And we're about to launch a big investigation in one of the areas, probably 2 or 3 miles west of the store. It's an area called Underwood Mountain. and we've had photographs of UFOs on the summit. I've personally taken pictures of glowing orbs at the base of that mountain. We've had reports of the ape cat out there, and people who live on the mountain have had reports as well. So the paranormal group here is going to be launching a pretty big investigation and trying to get some more details about that whole area. But yeah, so that's how we kind of got into it. My background, and like I said, I've had some unusual experiences myself, and some of them occurred in the Gorge prior to our program. And so I was sort of primed for it. But before I get too deep into any of that, I should probably sort of set the stage and describe for your listeners what the Columbia Gorge is like, where it is, and all that other kind of stuff.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
And also why we think it's one of the most active paranormal hotspots in North America. So the Gorge, like I said, is located in the Pacific Northwest. And the Columbia River is the largest river in North and South America that flows into the Pacific Ocean. And the Gorge is basically right in the middle of the Cascade Mountains. And it's about, the Gorge proper is about 80 miles long. To the north, we're bounded by Mount Adams, a famous UFO hotspot, and Mount St. Helens, obviously that mountain in the 80s. To the south, we're bounded by Mount Hood, which is a super big Sasquatch hotspot. And so those are three stratovolcanoes, perpetually glacier-clad, all within 35 miles of the store. And so the river is the only sea level passage through these Cascade Mountains, and you can go from basically sea level to 3,000 feet in less than half a mile. So the mountains form a rain shadow. So everything on the west side of it is like this deep, brooding, mysterious Pacific Northwest rainforest with waterfalls and caves. In fact, there were over 600 named waterfalls on the Oregon side alone, and some of those are over 600 feet tall.
Wow.
We've got well over 500 caves in the area. And then like I said, a really deep, thick forest, towering Douglas fir trees covered with moss. Some of them are over, close to 200 feet tall. I mean, it's just a remarkable area. But then when you get to the east side, there's that rain shadow, and it's a desert. And so we have desert mesas, with flat tops, steep sides, exposed rock cliffs, barren, austere, almost spiritual type of places. And sometimes, I'm a big Dungeons and Dragons nerd. We talked a little bit before the show. I work for Wizards of the Coast and WizKids, and so that's a big part of the things that are near and dear to my heart. And I realized, like, this is easily one of the world's coolest real world open maps. Like, you could have a whole Skyrim going on out here. And people go paragliding and whitewater rafting and mountaineering and rock climbing and windsurfing. It really is for a guy like me who loves outdoor adventure, I felt like I landed in paradise. And then come to find out that this place is entirely populated by strange, mysterious creatures and weird phenomenon and things that people don't understand fully. And so it's just been this really amazing voyage of discovery for us. And one of the things that makes this place so unique is that it has got one of the most complex and subtle electromagnetic environments anywhere in the world. And that's a story.
Yeah, I'd imagine, between the volcanic activity and the different landscapes with almost like a clash of climates.
Yeah, well, I don't want to go too deep into this, but so the river's been flowing here for over 20 million years. So that's a really strong established current of energy, which, there are 14 hydroelectric dams that produce 44% of all the hydroelectric power in the U.S. And so you've got these enormous amounts of energy being drawn out of the river's flow and converted into a power source that we fully understand. But so that 20 million years ago, we had this river flowing. 17 million years ago, this enormous fissure opens the earth. It's close to 100 miles long at the Idaho-Washington border, and enormous volumes of lava start flowing out of this thing. And they flow 300 miles all the way from Idaho to the Pacific Ocean down the ancient Columbia River Valley. It was wide, broad river valley at the time. And there were over 300 eruptive events over a course of a couple million years. So much lava came out of this fissure in the earth that if you distributed it across the U.S., it would bury the lower 48 states in 60 feet of lava. So, enormous. But what's weird about that is it came at, in different flows. And as the lava was cooling, its magnetic material oriented towards the Earth's magnetic North Pole, cooled, locked in place. Then 10,000 years pass, another flow comes, and the Earth's North Pole has wandered. And so that gets locked into the new North Pole. And so you've got a stack of, 50 to 100 different layers that are visible in some areas, and each one has got its own unique magnetic signature. And in fact, the government navigation maps of this area have bright pink warning letters on them that say, warning, your compass readings will be off in this area. So it is a well-established, well-known, established fact that this is, a weird magnetic zone. What makes it even worse than all that is that those Cascade Mountains started rising up 3 million years ago, and they took all those layers and buckled and folded them into these strange contorted shapes. And then 15,000 years ago, we had the world's greatest flood. And so this was the Younger Dryas floods, sometimes called the Missoula floods. There's a great, this is during the Ice Age, and there's this great, huge lake up in Missoula, Montana, held back by an ice dam. That dam catastrophically failed, and this enormous flood barreled across eastern Washington, over 300 feet deep. And then it got sort of held back at a place called Wallula Gap, which is at the east end of the gorge. And then the water rocketed down the gorge. And where my store is sort of located right in the middle, like right on the cusp of where the rainforest meets the desert, a place called Bingen, Washington. Some people might know Hood River, Oregon, which is a very famous windsurfing place.
Now, I'm going to have to interrupt you for 1 second. When you guys set up the store, did you know about all of this? Or how did that come to be in terms of locating where to put that store?
Well, my mother-in-law picked the spot, and it was just luck of the draw that we wound up there.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And so when that water was coming through where my store is, that water was 900 feet deep. And you can see how it scoured the rocks. And basically anything that was living, any topsoil, anything in the gorge was swept into the ocean. It was moving at 70 miles an hour, carrying boulders and icebergs and trees and animals and everything else. And it took all of those layers of magnetic rock and exposed them like a live wire. So this place is like, unlike any other place in the world, literally experienced apocalypses of fire and cataclysms of water on a scale that's biblical. It's like unbelievable. It's so far beyond a human scale. And those are some of the forces that created this place. And the reason why that's interesting is that our brains, they recently discovered, have magnetite crystals. They're contained within these things called magnesomes, and they're actually attached to the membranes of our brain cells. And those magnetite crystals can torque in these sheaths, and the human brain can sense them. They believe this is how animals that navigate over long distances for migration are able to determine which way is north. And there was a professor at Laurentide University up in Ontario, Canada, back in the 80s and 90s who did studies about what happens when you manipulate magnetic fields around human brains. And he was able to repeatably and consistently produce paranormal perceptions within people's minds.
Oh, yeah.
And so what we know is that magnetic fields create these unusual experiences for folks. And so with some of these things, like people would have a sensed presence, or they could have fear turn on and off like a switch. Sometimes they would see, lights or other things. And so you could say, well, that's just like local to someone's brain. They're having a personal hallucination. But out here in the gorge, we have events that are co-witnessed. For instance, there was an event not far from the store, probably about 4 miles west of the store. 8 people were sitting in a field watching a meteor shower, and then 2 satellites, what appeared to be satellites, came across, and when it got right over them, a green sheet-like laser shot out, scanned the forest, the field, them, the rest of the field, and up this other side of the forest, and was gone. And so that's an event that's co-witnessed by 8 people. My wife and I have seen glowing orbs with our bare eyes, and I've actually taken pictures of them with a camera, and we have that evidence. People have submitted pictures of UFOs over Underwood Mountain. And so we get hair samples have been brought into the store, reportedly from Sasquatch-like creatures. And so you
Have
have,
those undergone any kind of analysis or anything like that?
the problem with, like when I get these, obviously there's a funding issue, but the other thing is that I can't verify the custody of evidence. So I didn't collect the hair samples myself. So I
Oh,
don't
okay,
know
understood.
exactly where they came from. And if I'm going to invest in, taking a look at, getting these analyzed for genetic purposes, I would want to collect the hair samples myself before I went down that path. But we certainly have these events which seem to be, the area here, like I said, the 350 reports, and I know that that's just a fraction of the reports because, not everyone comes into my store and tells me the weird things that have happened to them. And so we believe it has a lot to do with this really unusual electromagnetic environment. Think about it like a radio station. If every day you are listening to talk radio and everyone listens to talk radio, and then one day your tuner gets bumped and suddenly you can hear classical music in your environment. Well, those signals are always present. That classical music is always being broadcast. It's just that your tuner, your electromagnetic receiver, was not tuned to it. And what I think is happening out here is people's tuners are getting adjusted unbeknownst to them, due to these. I mean, there's still active earthquakes, and the volcanoes often have earthquake swarms on them. So this is still a very geologically active area, and there are enormous forces, still pushing on the mountains today. And so I think what's happening is like these electromagnetic fields are getting manipulated, add in some solar weather and impacting the Earth's magnetosphere, and you create these conditions where our tuners are getting adjusted or bumped in ways that we don't fully understand, and people are having this inordinate amount of paranormal experiences out here.
Now you bring up something interesting there. Do you notice that there's an increase in reports or encounters or strangeness when there's like a solar flare or any kind of activity like that?
That's one of the things that the paranormal group is going to start to look at, tracking these, electromagnetic, there's magnetosphere and what's going on there with the reports. I mean, you have to understand, I'm running, 3 businesses right now. And so the resources that I have to execute these things are limited. The people that I hire, I have to have them, working on the businesses. And so what's exciting about this paranormal group is that they're volunteers and they're anxious and eager to help and really dive into some of these questions that I think could have some really interesting answers.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the more or the most compelling cases that you've got?
So there are really sort of 3 main categories of things that we hear about. We hear tons and tons of Sasquatch stories. In fact, so on the Washington side, there are 2 counties, Skamania County, which is pretty much the rainforest side, and Klickitat County, which is the desert side. And Skamania County was the first governmental body to actually enact Bigfoot protection legislation. If you kill a Bigfoot in Skamania County and the coroner determines that it's humanoid, you will be charged with manslaughter. And so that goes back all the way to 1968 when that law was enacted. And it's been updated a few times. So it's a pretty, one of the things that stunned my wife and I was it seemed like everyone that we talked to either had a Sasquatch encounter or knew someone who had. And so it's sort of like a rare animal sighting, almost like seeing a bear or something like that here. So Sasquatch, incredibly, we super index on that one. One gentleman, the guy who brought in the hair samples, has reported seeing up to 14 Sasquatch on his property at one time. And he's had numerous encounters. He's seen them with
14 of them on his property
at
the same time?
Yeah. And we actually
Lord,
went out to his property on a couple of different occasions and took a look at some of the areas where he's seen them. He's found like elk with their necks broken. For your listeners who don't know, elk is about the size of a horse. So imagine a creature that could break the neck of a horse, and that's the kind of creature we're talking about. So Sasquatch is, we've had everything from footprints to vocalizations, like multiple vocalizations where someone will be in the forest and they'll hear 3 different voices and they can tell the personalities of the different voices of these creatures, obviously not speaking English, but vocalizing to one another. Rocks being thrown, footprints. We've had trees twisted and broken, nest-like structures found in the forest. So Bigfoot is a very, very commonly reported thing. The next category are UAPs. So these are unidentified anomalous phenomenon, UFOs, glowing orbs. The area has got a lot of, there's government activity out here. And so that could be a part of it. But so
now, when you say government activity, what do you mean?
well, so this comes into a bunch of different categories. We get reports of what seem like highly advanced military aircraft, like black choppers that don't make sound.
Okay.
Triangular shaped craft, which some people say are UFOs. Other people say there's patents on these exact looking craft. And so some people think that those are advanced government craft. We have about 20 reports of people hiking in the forest in places that are normally public access and then getting stopped by either soldiers or what look like private security forces, carrying semi-automatic weapons, telling people, or rifles, telling people that they can't enter certain areas. So that's a common thing. And so there's a long history of that here, because just upriver from us is the Hanford nuclear site. And there's a whole set of strangeness that goes on there. It was part of the Manhattan Project. It was the site of the world's first industrial scale nuclear reactor. And so Washington State is both per capita the highest number of Bigfoot reports and the highest number of UFO reports. And in fact, the very first flying saucer report in America came from Washington State. There was a private pilot flying from Western Washington to Eastern Washington over the Cascades, really just sort of north of us. He saw, this was June 1947, and he saw 9 saucer-shaped craft flying from the north past Mount Rainier to Mount Adams, which is the mountain just north of us here. And so that's when the America's fascination and love affair with flying saucers began, was with the Kenneth Arnold report.
Yep.
And what's interesting about that is this Hanford nuclear site has many UFO reports. And there are stories of UFO bases on Mount Adams. Some people have taken pictures of what they claim to be a physical hangar door that opens and closes on the mountainside. And they see craft flying in and out of there. Right on the flanks of that mountain is a place called ECETI Ranch. ECETI stands for Enlightened Contact with Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And for decades now, Jim Gilliland has invited people onto his property, and people come from all over the world and they watch craft or lights fly around Mount Adams all night long. Sometimes those lights will start as one light and then separate into many. Other times there'll be many and they'll congeal into one. They seem to respond to conscious requests of some of the viewers at times. I mean, the number of stories that happen out there related to these what look like glowing orbs or glowing lights are, there's just a vast number of those types of reports. And so there's this thought that once humanity unlocked the secrets of the atom, aliens or interdimensional beings or whatever took great interest. And I've climbed to the top of Mount Adams myself, and you can see Hanford from up there. And so if they were studying what we're doing, that would be a fine place to camp out. There are reports of secret underground bases up there. And again, I can only tell you what people report to me, but many locals talk about bases around Mount Adams underground. We've had reports of portals in that area, and a whole set of strange activities. You mentioned that I'm a search and rescue EMT, and people go missing out here. There's some areas, one in particular called Broke Lake Barrows. It's this 8,000-year-old lava bed about the size of the island of Manhattan. A lot of mysterious things happen out there. Compasses don't work, cell phones don't work, and it's just a really difficult terrain. A guy went missing there in 2013, and they had put on a huge search for him, hundreds of searchers, thousands of man hours. They had dogs and choppers, but most interestingly, they actually had the Air Force pararescue team called out. Now, I've been on scores of search and rescue missions, and we never get boots on the ground government resources, military resources. I mean, maybe you might get a chopper, but never are you going to have actual servicemen deployed to look for a random civilian. And the fact that they sent out quite literally the country's best search and rescue team out to this weird old lava bed where we've had reports of Sasquatch and all kinds of other strange phenomenon out there. Really curious. So you asked about, like what type of government activity. That's just a sampling of some of the weird things that we've been hearing in the store.
Wow.
And then the final big category is this Klickitat ape cat. And before I get into that, we also get reports of, like you said, of small humanoids and portals and like one-off weird cryptids that I haven't heard anything before or since about.
I'm really interested in the small humanoids before you dive into the Klickitat ape cat.
Sure.
Can you describe some of the small humanoid reports?
Well, this one, so these are really few and far between. The one that is most credible to me came from one of my employees, a young man named Emilio. And Emilio is like he's been with the company since like when my mother-in-law was still alive. And he's been a part of this reporting program from the beginning. And one day he came in and said, James, I had the weirdest thing happen to me last night. He lives on the desert side, and he was driving home like after 1 a.m., right in the morning. This is really early. And he looked in on the side of the road at this sort of wide spot on the road. There was this strange, skinny, bipedal creature, humanoid body shape, standing on the side of the road, no taller than the hood of his car. And it had a large, he described it as a praying mantis-shaped head. And it was standing there on the side of the road. As he went past it, all of the lights in the center console of his car went dark. And then his cell phone started blowing up and going crazy with alarms going off and all kinds of things like that. He got about 200 yards down the road, and then he himself started feeling dizzy and weird, so he stopped the car. And for a second, he entertained the idea of going back to look at exactly what he had seen, because he knew I was going to be interested in it. And then he thought, hell no, it's not worth it. And so he just continued home. Interestingly, in that same spot, he said that on 5 other occasions, he had seen owls standing in the middle of the road. So I went out there, did an investigation the next day. There was no anomalous EMF readings. There were some tracks, but they were indiscernible. But I did find some owl pellets. And so there are some reports that I give more credence to, people that I know who, like if he wanted to make up stories, there's 100 opportunities to do that, and he never did. And this is the only, he's only really strange scenario he's related to me, and none since. And so, it's my own judgment about, what's credible and not credible. But that's one of those ones where, like, what the heck is going on? I've seen people have shown me footage on their phone of strange, what almost look like, the only way to describe it is it look like a fairy. Sort of think about Tinkerbell, and it's like this small humanoid figure flying. It's made of light. And it looks, for all the life of you, like Tinkerbell, like, the wings and the little tiny and everything else. And and a lot of times these people, like, they'll say, James, I told my brother about this 17 years ago. He told me I was on crack, and you're the second person I've told about this, right? Because a lot of people don't, like, life is hard enough. They don't need the trouble of being told they're crazy or trying to prove something which they know is real, but no one else is going to believe them. And they know that I'm an open ear and I'm not going to be judgmental. But yeah, and you look at these things, you're like, what is even going on here? Like, it's really hard to make sense of it. There's even one of the videos he showed me where, like, you can imagine, like, oh, maybe there's like a bug or something like that, and it's catching the light of his Ring camera, and maybe that's what we're talking about. But no, like, there's one where he is like 20 feet into his yard in his driveway, and he's sort of crouching down, and the thing is floating in front of him. And you can clearly see it on these videos. There are also reports that go way back to the Native Americans that have lived here for, over 10,000 years. And they talk about small humanoids who some of the stories say that they were the authors of the petroglyphs that you see in the desert side of the Gorge. They claim that these are perfectly formed humans that are anywhere between 18 to 24 inches tall, and they wore clothing woven from rabbit fur, is what the traditional stories say. We've had stories of small humanoids that people have encountered in the forest, loggers and forest rangers, things of that nature. And they seem to be perfectly formed humans, but just tiny.
Wow.
I scratch my head. I really don't know what to make of that. It doesn't seem to connect with anything that we recognize through modern science. But when you look at the oldest records of human thought, so you look at like the cave paintings in Lascaux, France, or Chauveau, like since we have been humans, we have been drawing impossible creatures. We've been recording these experiences.
Yeah.
Whether they be therianthropes, which are these human-animal hybrids, or chimeras, which are, combined animals, animals with different parts, things that by our understanding of biology are impossible. Yet on every continent where people have lived, in every culture, in every era of time, people are recording these things. It's as human as anything is to be talking about this and seeing these things. It's still rare. I mean, no one's saying that it's common, but it's certainly meshed into what we're doing. And so those are some of those small humanoid reports. And I want to be really clear, like, I can only tell you what people tell me. And, we have ways of assessing the credibility of folks. A lot of times, like when someone comes in and they sign the report, see more butts, we know they're just having fun. It's like, all right. And as far as I'm concerned, no harm, no foul. Like, it's no big deal.
People still use that, huh? That's
I know. Yeah, it's great. But other folks, they have really, really boring stories. And like, oh, I was driving my ATV and this giant black cat jumped across the trail and scared the crap out of me, and I never saw it again. Like, that's their whole story. They're not, it's not a mini series. It's not anything else. It's just like, it was this random weird encounter, and I don't know what to make of it. And so, like, that's kind of what a lot of the reports are. And so that's where we start to look for these patterns. And the one that's really captivated my attention is this creature we call the Klickitat ape cat. And like I said before, we've had over 100 reports of this thing. And so the name comes from the very first report we had, which occurred here in Klickitat County, near a place called Buck Creek, about 3 miles from the store. And a gentleman came in. He actually knew my mother-in-law. She had helped him, his family with something. And so kind of a friend of the family, but I had never met him before. And it took him about 45 minutes to work up the courage to tell a story. And he was orienteering, and his compass started acting strange. So that in and of itself, not a big deal. There's lots of weird compass stuff that goes on out here. And then he looked up across this creek, and he saw this enormous black cat. So a big cat, black fur, long tail, sitting there watching him. And right away, my antenna went up. So of course, we've got cougar that live out here. But there's a few things about cougars. One, scientifically, the scientific community does not recognize black cougars. They say that cougars are either like a tan, tawny color, or when their melanin expresses, they go to a more red color, never black. The only black big cat in North America is a jaguar, but their range is 1,000 miles south of here in like southern New Mexico, Arizona, that area. So, all right, you've got a cat with black fur. That's really unusual. Number two, it's huge. He said this thing was 4 to 5 feet tall at the shoulder. And I was like, well, there is no cougar that's that big. In fact, there's no tiger that's that big, and tigers are the biggest cats on the planet. So that's another, like, okay, what's going on with this? And then the fact that it was just looking at him, completely unafraid. So cougars will abandon a fresh kill at just the sound of human voices. And this first report, the creature seemed completely unafraid of him. And that is something that we hear echoed in probably, a third of the reports. People explicitly say the creature was completely unafraid of me, or it approached me, or it didn't seem, or it looked me in the eyes. And so we hear that a lot. So those three things right there were enough for me to say, wow, this is something unusual. And then he said, at the end of the story, he said, and the weirdest thing, James, was it had a face that looked like a monkey. And, you hear something like that and you're like, you have no frame of reference for it, right? And
Like a large cat with an ape-like face.
Exactly. And so, like I said, we probably have 120 plus reports of this thing right now, and only about 10% of them, maybe a little bit even less than that, explicitly describe this ape-like face. And that typically talks about a shortened snout, so not as extended, and then a leathery or furless face. So really, really weird, because of course cats have fur all over their faces, and it's only a fraction of the reports. And then of the size, about 50% of the reports describe this enormous size. The rest of it just say it's a very large, very muscular cat. So I did some research. There is a cat that is that large in the fossil record. It's a creature, it's an Ice Age American lion called the Panthera atrox. So this was a creature that lived alongside humans 10,000 years ago, right here in Washington State. It was reportedly 4 to 5 feet tall at the shoulder, 8 feet from snout to rump, and 900 to 1,300 pounds. It's extremely well documented. We even have a replica skull of it in the store. This was a creature that was caught in the Brea tar pits down in Los Angeles, and so we were able to get the replica of it, and it's just enormous. It's this huge, huge, huge cat, but it's the only thing in the fossil record that matches it. So again, like, what a remarkable story, right? This guy comes in, we're closing, he lays this on me. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. But again, it's a single data point. He seemed credible to me for a number of different reasons, but hard to know, like, really what was going on with it. The next day, I was talking to my employees, and I was excitedly describing this creature, this report that we got. And one of my employees, Missy, she started shaking. And she said, my God, James, I've seen that thing myself. She was driving down Klickitat Canyon at dawn, and she saw it outside of her car door window. She actually stopped her car to watch it, so she got a really good look at it. She didn't see its face. She said, yeah, I saw this enormous black cat, long tail, and it freaked me out. I wondered if I should, talk to the people who live nearby, the homesteads nearby, and she just said, oh, they'll think I'm crazy. And that was probably wise of her, because when she told her family, they said, oh, Missy, and you have to understand, like, Missy is one of the most honest people I know. Like, she feels guilty playing practical jokes on her coworkers because it's kind of like lying. And so to see her visceral emotional reaction to just my description of this creature, that impacted me. Like, she definitely had an experience. And when she told her family, they, like everyone, tried to normalize it. They said, oh, you probably just saw a cow. So, I mean, think about that. Like, this is a grown woman. Like, you clearly know the difference between a cow and a cat. Like, there's really, like, it's like saying, like, let's say you saw a Lamborghini, a red Lamborghini driving down the street in your town, and you told your friends, oh my God, I saw this red Lamborghini. They said, Lamborghinis are super rare. You probably just saw a red minivan and were mistaken. It's like, no, I know what I saw. But what that did was that had the effect of she never told anyone else about it, right? She's like, I don't need this kind of trouble. And really, we get that from so many of the reports where people will tell me, yeah, I came to you because I knew that you wouldn't make fun of me. And it's that reputation of having this open mind. And there are two reasons why we do that. The first is there was a Harvard psychologist, his name was John Mack, and he studied people who had been abducted or claimed to have abduction experiences. And he went through a rigorous study, and he even had a colleague of his who wasn't aware of what he was studying look at these people to determine if they had any mental illnesses, the kind of things that would result in telling fabulous stories that weren't true. And the only thing that either of them found was that some of them had PTSD, but none of them had the symptoms of, schizophrenia or any of the types of mental illness which cause people to make false reports. So those people, whatever their experience was real to them. And because of his wisdom, he was able to, help them work through these issues. But it was clear that although their experiences were extraordinary and out of everyone else's frame of reference, what they experienced was real. It wasn't because they were crazy. And then you look now at what the military is doing with UFO reports, and they've sort of taken the stigma out of filing reports for pilots, especially after the gun camera footage and things like that has been released. And now there are a flood of pilots who are telling their stories because they know it's not a career-ending move for them. And so that's why we had this policy. So after Missy's report, after this one guy, and then the very next day, Missy tells me she had a similar experience. So like, well, this is something we're digging into. So we took some of the radio advertising budget for the store and we started asking if people had seen anything like this. And then we put up some flyers at some of the local trailheads. And lo and behold, reports started flooding in. And there was a lot of details that I kept hidden, like kept close to the vest so that we could tell if people were, making stuff up or, and there's this remarkable consistency. We've had senior law enforcement officials tell us that they've seen the creature. The reports go back to 1968. We've had reports of the creature with cubs or younglings, so that we clearly have a reproducing population of these things out here. But it's a huge mystery. Like, where did these things come from? And there's some stories, there's like some petroglyphs that seem to indicate that these are creatures that may have been around for millennia. There are those folks up at East City Ranch. They claim to be in contact with a race of feline humanoids. It may be those things, but if you don't want to evoke some type of supernatural explanation, the most rational and reasonable explanation is that these creatures escaped from the animal testing laboratory at the Hanford nuclear site just upriver. So it's pretty wild. And
are there reports of any other kind of animal hybrid sort of things that would fall in line with this ape cat?
So in terms of the cat itself, I've heard rumors that there are other areas that have seen cats. There was a black cat creeping around England called the Beast of Bodmin Moor back in the 70s, I think it was. And there are other reports of black cats in North America. But science refuses to recognize it. They say absolutely not. But the reason why we think that this may have come from the animal testing laboratory at the Hanford nuclear site is because they actually had, we have absolute historical confirmation that they were conducting bizarre radiation experiments on apex predators out there. And I first caught wind of this. I found a newspaper article. I was trying to figure out, where could these things come from? What is a rational explanation for it? And I found an article. So the Hanford site was our number one nuclear production facility. They called it the Apocalypse Factory because Hanford during the Cold War had 9 nuclear reactors, and they churned out enough plutonium to build 60,000 nuclear weapons. So it is one of our most important nuclear sites. It was there from the beginning with the Manhattan Project. But it was closed down in the 1980s because the Cold War had ended and we had more than enough plutonium than we would ever need. And so it became the country's biggest Superfund cleanup site. And I found this article where, digging in the desert, they found a boxcar filled with the radioactive carcasses of some of the animals that they were testing on. And they were half burned. So they had attempted to burn these creatures. The fire didn't work or whatever, and so they had buried this whole boxcar filled with animal carcasses. And it turns out that during the Cold War, so I should go back, World War II, Allies are terrified the Nazis are going to unlock the secrets of the atom before we do. So they start the Manhattan Project. And so Oppenheimer's down in Los Alamos with the engineers designing the bomb. But at Hanford, the government confiscates 600 square miles of land, kicks everyone off their property, and starts building this Hanford site where they're going to build the world's first nuclear reactor. And from day one, so everyone knows that the bomb is the big concern, but the Nazis are really into creating super soldiers and super animals. And so the Allies were concerned. They knew back in the 40s that radiation could induce mutations, but they didn't know much more than that. And they were terrified that the Nazis were going to start creating, super animals. So they tapped a professor at the University of Washington by the name of Dr. Lorne Donaldson. And his only academic achievement before getting this posting was that he had actually created a super animal. It's called the Donaldson super trout, and it is a fish that is 8 times larger and stronger than a normal trout. It reaches sexual maturity in half the time, can swim in fresh water and salt water, and is hyper survivable and super super vigorous. And in fact, it's still alive today. They, populate fisheries with it and everything. So he's the guy they put in charge of this animal testing laboratory at the start of the Manhattan Project. And he's conducting a lot of weird tests on fish and things like that at the time. So then we win World War II. They announce Hanford is no longer secret. And then we realize the Russians are scooping up Nazi scientists. So we start scooping up Nazi scientists under Operation Paperclip. And they clamp down Hanford again. Well, Donaldson is such a rock star in the field of, animal testing and what happens with radiation that he winds up going down to the South Pacific, and he's part of like all the Bikini Atoll tests and the disastrous Castle Bravo test, which gave rise to the whole Godzilla mythology. But he stays in contact with the new guy in charge at Hanford, a guy named Bill Baer. And I've watched 3-hour-long oral interviews with Bill. He's dead now. And he describes how, under his watch, this animal testing laboratory grew to where they could house over 1,000 large animals. And basically everything we know about radiation medicine comes from Hanford. And so they were conducting stuff that makes sense. Like, if cows eat grass with radioactive fallout on it, can you drink their milk? Can you eat their meat? Like, those are really important questions for a country concerned about nuclear war. But he also tells this story in all 3 of the interviews about how they were conducting these bizarre radiation experiments on alligators. So they were testing apex predators. And through the course of the story, you learn that one night, 6 of these experimental creatures outsmarted the scientists and escaped from their pens and got into the Columbia River. Well, for a number of reasons, they decided to go public with this, because they didn't want civilians finding these things swimming around in the river, because like the river is public access. And so they put out press releases about it. So this is not only confirmed in Bill Baer's oral histories, but also in newspaper articles of the time. And they had this army hunting team that went out, and for 6 months, they tried to hunt down these radioactive alligators that had escaped from the testing lab. Well, they only ever caught 4 of them. And by this time it's January, and they made the call that these alligators probably couldn't survive the winter, so they called off the hunt. But in these interviews, Bill says even into the 80s, he was getting calls from Fish and Wildlife guys asking if he knew anything about alligators in the Columbia River. And he would just always say no and just hang up on them. And in the interviews, he laughs about how funny it was that he did that. So we've got this absolute confirmation that they're testing apex predators. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why the hell would they be doing that? Like, livestock, sheep, cattle, that all makes sense. It's part of our food supply. But we don't eat alligators. They're not a part of the American diet. It's not like, we need to know what's going on there. And to understand how all that relates to cats, we need to talk about what the U.S. government was doing with dolphins at the time. So since 1958, the U.S. government has been using dolphins to guard some of our most sensitive nuclear sites. And the reason why is that one of the biggest threats are Soviet scuba divers coming in at night and surveilling or sabotaging your sites. Many of our most important nuclear sites are on waterways. And in 1950s technology, you can't tell on sonar if what you're looking at is a tuna fish or a sea lion or, a Soviet diver. But you can train a dolphin to tell the difference. And so what they would do was they would rig this special apparatus to the snout of the dolphin. It had like a barbed harpoon-like protrusion on it. And they would train that dolphin to ram that dart into the diver's flesh. And then a balloon would inflate and it would bring the diver to the surface. And then the atomic security forces would come and scoop that guy up. A dead diver at the bottom of the ocean doesn't tell you anything. You don't gather any intelligence. So you really want to know, what that guy is doing. And so it's an extremely effective program. By the 1980s, a quarter of the U.S. nuclear stockpile is guarded by dolphins. And Hanford is our most important
That's incredible. Site. I had no idea about that.
Yeah. So Hanford, super important site. Like, it's where all the plutonium gets made for all of our nuclear weapons. And it's got 45 miles of the Columbia River that flows through it. That's 90 miles of river coastline that you've got to guard. Really difficult security task. You would love to bring in dolphins, but dolphins only operate in salt water and the Columbia River is freshwater. So what do? Well, if you are a zealous cold warrior, you're going to start wondering, okay, if we can't get dolphins, what is the world's best riverine hunter? Like, is there a freshwater creature that hunts in freshwater that we can train to do a similar program? And the pressure to be successful at this is immense. There's a Nike missile defense system back in the 50s and 60s. Basically, it's a nuclear tipped surface to air missile. The idea was it's better to try to take out Soviet bombers and detonate a nuclear weapon over U.S. civilian populations than to allow those bombers access to Hanford. Like, that's how crazy it was. There were 4 of these Nike missile launch sites at Hanford. Every other site in America had 1, maybe 2 at the most. So that's sort of telling you, like, we are like at level 10 for security here. And so you're going to start asking yourself what creatures could possibly guard the river. You might try alligators, but you would absolutely look at the world's most effective river hunter, which is the black jaguar. These creatures can hold their breath for 15 minutes. They can swim a kilometer in the open ocean. Pound for pound, they're the strongest of the big cats. They have night vision that's 6 times better than a human being. And as a cherry on top, they always instinctively drag their prey to shore. So if you had a checklist of like, what is the perfect creature to try to train or manipulate into a sentinel creature, jaguars are going to be at the top of your list. 100%. There's no question about it. And so what we think happened was, just like the gators, they were testing and manipulating black jaguars. The creatures outsmarted the scientists and escaped. And once they escaped, they couldn't recapture them. If you look at where Hanford is located, if you go north, east, or south of there, you just go deeper into the desert. If you head west into Klickitat County, there's tons of available habitat and food and all kinds of things to eat and to survive on. And so, like I said, the most rational explanation for why we've got these enormous black cats, over 120 reports of them creeping around the Columbia River Gorge, is that they escaped from that animal testing laboratory during the Cold War. And once they got out, there was no recapturing them.
Now, is it possible that Sasquatch and Bigfoot could be something from those experiments as well?
It's possible, but reports of Bigfoot far predate the Hanford nuclear site. And so we have, reports that go back well.
That's why I'm thinking that if they took some and experimented on them.
Oh, that could very well be. That guy who saw 14 on his property, he has seen them with black fur, red fur, brown fur, even white fur during the wintertime. And so, like, who knows? There are also many, many stories, and unconfirmed, of course. So this is Mount St. Helens erupted, and there was government evacuation teams, and the military was called out and everything else. And there are several soldiers who've come forward after the fact to say that they were parts of details that went and collected the carcasses of Sasquatch. There was even one really astonishing story where one of the soldiers was part of a detail that was driving around a Sasquatch that was partially burned, and they were checking on various caves in the area and looking for survivors of Bigfoot tribes. And the U.S. military was assisting this population of Bigfoot in that process. We have stories of giant double-propped Chinook helicopters flying with cargo nets filled with Sasquatch bodies away from the area. And so it seems like, if you listen to the local lore and legends, that the U.S. government is fully aware of the Bigfoot population. In fact, there's even a U.S. Army survival manual, page 72, I believe, that actually discusses Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest. It was published 1 year and then never published again. And so there's really strong evidence. I don't know if it's strong evidence. There's some evidence, I should say, that the government is aware of these creatures and has been interacting with them, has some type of agreement with them to protect them from the general public.
Very interesting. Man, oh man. Now, James, we just passed the 1 hour mark. Can I have you for like another half hour? Is that possible?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So we're going to take a quick break here. If you need to get a drink or whatever, feel free to do so. Just about 2 minutes or so. All right. And I'm also then the last half hour, I'm going to open up for questions in the chat too and see if anybody, sometimes we throw in a link if someone wants to hop on the show and actually ask a question live on the air. Are you okay with that?
Oh, absolutely. I'd be happy to.
Okay, all right. So if anybody in the chat does want to come on here and talk to us and have a question for James, please feel free to do so. So 2 minutes, we'll be right back. You're watching Comic Book Radio. This is episode 221. My guest tonight is James SZUBSKI. We're talking about cryptids, UFOs, portals in the Columbia River Gorge. I'll see you guys in just 2 minutes. Don't go anywhere.
Sekai was always afraid of the dark. A trait unbecoming of a samurai.
I haven't followed the path of Buddha, but tonight I ask for finality. I have persevered from the low to realize my moment, my dream.
But what Sekai lacked in courage, he made up in ambition, skill, and perseverance. To become a lord, how far would he go? What lines would he cross? And where will loyalties die? You must flee. Never. To become a lord, this is my dream.
All right, welcome back. So we have James SZUBSKI on the show tonight, and man, this has been one hell of an hour. I can't wait to see what we got going in the last half hour. Now, there are a couple questions in the chat already. If you guys do want to join the show, though, please, if you have a question for James, I know some of you guys have questions for me. This isn't the show for that. Questions for James, questions for me another night. Come on the show here. There's a link right there in the chat. I hope you guys stop in and ask away. Now, we do have a question here from Rex. Rex wants to know, are there any strange sounds in the area?
We absolutely have Bigfoot vocalizations. And so we have numerous reports of folks hearing things like that out in the forested areas. We also have numerous reports of glowing orbs, and sometimes there is humming associated with those reports. And so those are the two primary sounds that I am recalling from the reports, but it doesn't seem to be like sometimes like there's those trumpet sounds or things like that that people hear. We haven't any of those reports in the store yet.
Would you say that there are sounds that are maybe kind of an approximation to like frequencies that like 2 or 3 tones, like they don't make much sense, like you wouldn't hear it normally?
I can only talk about the things we've had reported in the store, and that's not one of the categories of things we've heard a lot about.
Okay. I have a question for you in terms of some of the stuff that's going on over there. You personally, what are some of the things especially that really stick out in your mind in terms of any of the encounters or things you've seen or heard or anything like that?
I had mentioned that place called Broke Leg Barrows where that guy went missing and the Air Force pararescue team showed up. That place to me is fascinating. We've had a professional remote viewer who used to do basically a psychic spy. He used to work for the government, had his own private business advising, equity capital firms and stuff like that. They did a study on this area, and they all of their evidence pointed this is where there are settlements of Sasquatch or forest people or whatever you want to call them. Now, I was out there, and it is so. Just to set the stage, I have been land navigating, map and compass work at a professional level since I was 19 years old with the Army, right? And then again, fighting fires and doing search and rescue. So I know my way around the wilderness, and I literally cannot remember the last time I was turned around or lost. There's a number of things that you do when you know how to land navigate. This area, and I've navigated in glaciers and deserts and swamps and forests, like basically every type of terrain. This place scares me. Like, it is one of the weirdest, most difficult terrain areas that I've ever been in. And I was out there flying my drone. So part of one of the features is you get these lava tube caves. So the lava will start flowing like maybe down an old river valley. The top hardens and insulates the interior. Then the lava all flows through, and what's left is a tube. It's called a lava tube. And it's basically a long cave. And there's a whole network of these caves. In fact, that's what Chris Zitzowitz, the guy who went missing, was looking for when he went missing. Well, sometimes there's a earthquake and those collapse and they form trenches. It's a long story, but basically, I parked my rig and I entered into this lava bed. And imagine, like, it's 8,000 years old. There are these sort of like stunted, weird trees out there. There's moss on the rocks. It's unnaturally silent. It's a really weird place. So I went in about 100 yards, and there was, let's just say, a north-south trench. And so I flew my drone up and down this trench a couple of times just to get some footage of it. And then the drone hit a branch at the south end of this trench. And so I went and gathered it up. And then I carefully walked up the whole trench from north to south. I took a 90-degree turn west, and then I walked 400 yards deeper into Broke Lake Barrow. So deeper into the thing. I should have been 500 yards away from my vehicle, right? At least. And then I found another trench, and I thought, oh, this is really cool. I'm going to take some drone footage of this one too. And so I started flying my drone up and down this trench, this new trench, and I looked over my shoulder, and there was my car 100 yards away. And like waking up from a dream, I realized that I was back at the south end of the first trench that I had flown the drone in. Now, you have to understand, this was utterly unsettling. Like, for a guy like me, I'm literally the kind of person you call when someone else gets lost in the forest, right? And for me to have so vastly lost my bearings, it was really a befuddling experience. Like, it's never happened. Like, you're always the pace count, keep an eye on the sun, terrain features, you're building mental maps. There's a whole series of like subroutines that are running in the background. And to like waking up from a dream, like have no knowledge that I was a place that I had already been, it's never happened to me before. And I realized that I had been, and what I thought was a 15-minute little adventure was actually a 2-hour adventure. Oh, wow. And I had this huge spatial displacement experience going on. So like that was one of the ones that was like, holy cow. Like, I've been hearing these stories for a couple of years at that point, and to like literally have your mind wiped from a whole segment of time and travel, really disconcerting experience. On the one hand, like, it was like, what the hell just happened to me? But once I started thinking about it, I realized, if there was something, or a group of somethings that didn't want me to go deeper into that area, this was the most benevolent way to sort of set me back to start and keep me out of there. Like, no harm was done to me. There was no, I wasn't placed in a area where I couldn't find my way out. They just put me right back where I started and said, nope, this is as far as you go today. So that to me was like, again, it's only because of like the thousands of hours I've spent in the wilderness, navigating off trail, map and compass, that it was so disconcerting. It was such a anomalous experience for me to have that happen. That was one of the ones that like, well, there's really something going on here. And then another encounter that I had, there is this desert mesa called Horse Thief Butte. Imagine, flat top, steep sides. And it's a really interesting, mysterious place. It looks like a solid hunk of rock, like a monolith. But as you get up into it, you realize that it's like riddled with this labyrinth of hidden passageways and natural amphitheaters, petroglyphs on the walls. There are these sort of rock nests where the Native Americans would go on vision quests. And it sort of is just above the Columbia River, and it looks down into a lake called Horse Thief Lake. And then on the far end of that lake is a thing called Petroglyph Park, where there's actually a petroglyph of this ape-cat creature. Well, I was up there one evening, probably at 7 o'clock, and I looked down into this lake, probably about 700 yards away, and I saw a large creature swimming in the lake. Now, the creature was dark in color, it's bigger than a person, was smaller than a car. It seemed to be patrolling the center of the lake, and it would submerge for up to 5 minutes and come back up and, continue to patrol the center of the lake. it was too far away for me to really get a good understanding. And this was before we had the paranormal reporting program. And I went through the list of creatures that live out here, and I was like, what the hell could it be? It could be like a bear might be that big, but bears are point-to-point swimmers. They're not the kind that are going to submerge for 5 minutes and come back up. An elk is another creature that's that size, but they definitely don't submerge, another point-to-point swimmer. And as I went down the list, like, there was nothing that I could imagine that thing could be. And I just chalked it up to what the hell. And then we started getting all these reports about this big black cat. And when I learned that they're such phenomenal swimmers, I was like, that might have been what I saw. Now, it's unconfirmed, but that's one of the things, 2 experiences from the Gorge of like weird stuff that's happened to me personally. Oh, and also, my wife and I have seen the glowing orbs, and I actually have photographic evidence of them as well.
Sometimes those things will follow you. Has that kind of stuff happened to you?
There are some folks that have had that experience, reported that experience. It's rare. One of the most interesting ones was that a guy was driving on the main highway along the river. This was back in the 90s. And he saw a big white one flying like above the water. And there was a state patrol car sort of driving next to him. And they both are looking at each other like, are you seeing this thing? And then the thing dove into the river, and they could see its light moving underwater. And so we have a lot of bizarre experiences like that where people are seeing these things. They seem to be transmedium craft. But in terms of like following this, like only a small handful of folks have reported something like that. But we have had some really interesting ones where people see an orb like moving along a ridgeline, and then immediately thereafter they have a Sasquatch experience.
That's a pretty common thing. I mean, when I had Dr. Simeon Hine on the show, he was talking about that kind of phenomena that's associated with Bigfoot. It reminds me, I mean, the closest thing I could think of, it reminds me of like the scene in Terminator. And all I could picture is like a Sasquatch coming out of like this big orb. But it's interesting. It's really interesting, the correlation between the two, these patterns that come up. Do you guys have like trail cams or anything like that? Any kind of night vision or thermal or anything that you guys use, either that's on the property or that you've used when you've gone out trying to find anything?
There's a number of folks who have. And in fact, the paranormal group is going to set up some cameras on Underwood Mountain to try to capture some stuff. Right now, we don't have anything set up. But that's, like I said, sort of the next step for this Gorge Paranormal Group.
Nice. Well, it's crazy how many experiences you've already had. I have to keep stopping myself because you've only been doing this, what, 2.5 years?
Yeah.
In terms of taking those reports and those accounts?
Yeah. It really, I think it comes down to broadcasting widely that we're open and we're going to take it as it comes, and we're going to treat you with dignity and respect. And I think that a lot of ordinary people have extraordinary experiences, and we talk ourselves out of them. We see Lamborghinis and we tell ourselves we're seeing minivans. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of folks get into that mode where they don't want to seem crazy. They kind of want to go along, and they fail to trust the sovereignty of their own witness. And but my sense is, after talking to so many, like I said, literally hundreds of people, that a lot more people have these kind of experiences, and they either talk themselves out of it or they just never talk about it with anybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, we got some comments here / questions. Rachel says, I live up in British Columbia and wonder if these animals could have made it across the border.
So a jaguar can travel 25 miles in a day. If these things have been creeping around since 1968, they could be all over the United States by now.
Wow.
And Canada.
Rex says, I wonder about my area because of the sightings around here. Sasquatch footprints and howling orange orbs. Rex has actually sent me a video. He sent it, I don't know, maybe a year or so ago. There's a footprint that was very convincing on his property, and sounds that were
and where does Rex live?
Unusual. I'm not entirely sure. if Rex, if you want to say like what state you're in or city or something like that, feel free. If not, don't worry about it. But it was compelling. It was creepy. The sounds especially were creepy. Says he saw an orange orb just before the Sasquatch screaming.
Yeah, we've had similar reports here as well. It seems to be like a one of those type of phenomena, which there seems to be a correlation between them. Absolutely,
Wow.
yeah.
He says north central Kentucky.
Interesting. I think that's close. There was one of the the Manhattan Project nuclear sites, not far from there. Oak Ridge, maybe it's Oak Ridge, Tennessee. I'm not. I'll have to check that. But yeah, who knows what kind of weirdness was going on out there?
Wow. Yeah, he says he's got plenty of sounds, deep mechanical sounds, what sounds like recordings in other languages.
That's an interesting one. There's a woman who filed a really interesting report. She was rock hounding, and every time she goes to this one area, she hears the sound of panicked horses and then human voices that aren't speaking English. She thinks that it's some type of echo of a Native American massacre that occurred there. But who knows? Yeah, I'm really fascinated by some of those. Like, there used to be a whole series of videos people put out about like what sounded, they call them angelic trumpets or something like that, sort of like this mechanical sound. We haven't had a bunch of reports like that yet, but I'm definitely got my ears open for them.
Now, do you think the electromagnetic activity over there, do you think these things that it's causing hallucinations, or do you think that this kind of stuff is expanding consciousness in some way, shape, or form? What are your thoughts on all of that?
Hallucinations is a valid theory. My problem with it is that we have physical evidence to match. So we've got photographs of UFOs, we have photographs of orbs, we've got footprints, we've got hair samples, we've got co-witnessed events. If it was a personal hallucination, you wouldn't have the supporting physical evidence. And in terms of like what is going on there, I think that, like I said, we are switching our tuning. Like, it's you wouldn't say that the country music station is more spiritual than the classical music station or the talk radio station. They're just different stations, and we are all calibrated. Like, I think every one of us has no problem understanding that our dogs can hear sounds that we can't hear, can smell things that we can't see. We can't see things in the infrared or ultraviolet spectrum. Humans actually have a very narrow band of perception. And, with these magnetite crystals in our brains, and there are over 2 billion of them, like, it is a 100% documented phenomenon. And magnetite is like not something that accidentally forms. It is actually synthesized by the brain. And so this is a structure which was deemed evolutionarily important enough for us to have it in us, right? And they are magnetically sensitive. And so what that means is that messing with those fields alters our perception, and it may be switching our channels so that we are perceiving things that we don't normally perceive. My sense is there is an absolute independent reality associated with them, these phenomena that people are experiencing, whether it be the orbs or the Bigfoots or the cats. It's just that they're not always tuned to be able to perceive them. And under the right conditions, your tuner gets adjusted, and suddenly you're hearing things that no one else can hear, or you don't normally hear, or seeing them or experiencing them.
Yeah, I agree. Now, what are your thoughts in regards to the origins of some of these kinds of, like the UFOs in particular? Why do you think that they're so drawn to this area? Is it specifically the electromagnetic stuff with the activity in the mountains and this and that, or is it something else?
Like I said, it's hard to escape the notion that this is the place where we were creating plutonium, an element that doesn't exist in nature. Like, we were creating elements that were brand new, right? And so, like, there is this intense government endeavor. It's like at the time, a super huge project. The investment made in Hanford was even greater than the investment made in Los Alamos. And so if there is any type of beings that are interested in what the hell we're doing with this power that can literally destroy worlds, like that seems to be a magnet for it, right? Like that to me is a plausible explanation that whether these things are, you could call it extra dimensional or outside of our normal perceptive capacity or what have you, but this area, because of the government activity out here, is absolutely a draw for that. So that's a part of the thing, right? And then I think another part of it is that because it is because of our weird electromagnetic environment, this is almost like a paranormal crossroads where things are able to more easily pass into our world here. Like just like we need to be tuned, they need to be tuned as well. And this is a place that's super conducive to that adjustment. We get like weird one-off cryptids. Like a young girl saw a snake. It was a 3.5 foot long yellowish snake with red frills on the side of its head. That's not a creature that's recorded anywhere in science or recognized by mainstream science at all. There's another family that encountered a pack of hairless whistling creatures about the size of Great Danes that seemed to be harassing their camp and then fled when the sun rose. And another person reported a white furred creature, a quadruped, that like they were driving down a dirt road and this thing came out of a gully and kept pace with their car for a distance and didn't seem to have a head. So again, as these reports come in, a lot of them are one-offs. You can't really say this definitively happened or whatever, but there's this collection of strange encounters that seem to be focused in this area. There's something going on here which makes it more conducive for those things to slip into our world or for us to perceive them here. Really hard to say. It's a delicious, wonderful, exciting mystery as far as I'm concerned.
Now, have you been approached by any government agencies or anything like that in terms of the reports and the accounts that you guys are getting? Not
overtly. So there have been some weird experiences here and there, eyebrow raising, but they haven't given me a hard time.
Okay. No men in black knocking on your door or anything like that?
No, but again, like we've had these several reports of people encountering, like we've got a bunch of Forest Service roads up here and people will be out there recreating or hunting or mushroom picking or just camping. And they'll be blocked from entering an area by people in paramilitary uniforms. There was one woman who was horseback riding. She was getting close to sort of a deep gorge, like a gully, that type of thing. And there was a glowing light they could see within it. And then two men with rifles, claiming to be from the power company, told her that she couldn't go any further. So...
Wow. That was like the best they could come up with. We're from the power company. Don't mind these rifles that we're holding.
Exactly. And so, whenever I do hear one of those reports, I usually try to get out to that area and investigate it and see if they're still there or whatever. But it seems like it's fairly, it's not uncommon for that to happen where we, get those reports. And so, but yeah, so far, no one's given me a hard time.
Good. Well, I mean, the thing is, as soon as they do, you're like, we're on to something.
Yeah, kind of a red flag, right?
Yeah, it's that's why I think so many people are like, well, why won't the government step in with this and do that and do the other thing? And as soon as they start doing that, it's like that's
as soon as you notice
that's confirmation.
Yeah, exactly.
So they gotta play it like, okay, we're just gonna maybe watch from a distance.
The other thing is that, I don't think a ton of people were taking us seriously at the beginning, but now that we've got 300 reports and I do a lot of podcast interviews, like it's almost, it would be really noticeable if they, approached a loudmouth like myself and, suddenly I had to shut up. Like that's even more suspicious. And so, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, man, this has been an unbelievably interesting conversation, James. Is there anything that we left out that you want to touch upon before we wrap things up in a few minutes?
No, there's so much. I mean, like we could talk for hours and hours and hours. And obviously, I'm passionate and I love this stuff, and it's super interesting to me. So, if I open any other cans of worms, we're going to be at this for another hour. So let's just.
All right. I'll have to bring you back then. I'll bring you back, and we'll continue.
That sounds.
But man, oh man, this was fascinating. This was great, and you know your stuff, man. Because there's a bunch of things. I don't talk. I try not to talk too much when I have a guest like yourself on here. But I'm like, no, he's bringing up all the pertinent things. Because sometimes people go in there and I don't know if they know if I know anything or not, and they're like, let me just talk. I'll just make up a bunch of different facts and things and whatever, and we'll see what I can get away with. But no, like every single thing you were bringing up, 100%, and it's fascinating to hear about the experiences you guys are having over there. And I'm looking forward to.
I encourage people to come out to the Gorge and visit. Like, we didn't even talk about the ghost activity out here. Like, there are so many different categories of weird stuff. And even if you don't see Sasquatch or a giant cat or a UFO, you come out here and you just get the sense that you're in some kind of magical place. Like, it's almost unavoidable. If you can just calm your mind for even just a few seconds, like, you feel it when you're here. There's something about this place that is otherworldly and stunningly beautiful. And so I encourage anyone who's remotely interested in this stuff to come out and visit and see for yourself. You will not be disappointed.
Oh, I hear you. I hear you big time on that. That's one of the biggest things that when we moved up here to New Hampshire, visiting like the White Mountains and other various places, like you feel the energy shift. You feel the difference. You feel that there's something, and before moving up here, I wasn't aware of all the paranormal activity that was in the area. And then diving into it, I was like, wow. There's a lot of things going on. So I know exactly what you mean. And maybe one day I'll get a chance to get out there. But that sounds great.
Yeah.
If anyone's living over there, Rachel, you said that you're kind of in the region. Maybe stop by and say hello to James and visit the area and see what's what. But wow. All right. Before we go, anything you want to plug? Anything you want to let the folks know about in terms of where to find you, or if you've got a book or anything along those lines?
So the best place is margiesoutdoorstore.com, a great place to start. We post a lot on Facebook and Instagram, so Margie's Outdoor Store and both of those handles. We got a couple of videos up on YouTube. We're about to start a new podcast, Chronicles of the Enchanted Gorge. And so keep an eye on our Facebook. Probably going to be a month before that goes live. But we're pretty excited. There's lots of cool stuff. We'll go over paranormal reports and all kinds of interesting things that are going on out here. So, So look for Chronicles of the Enchanted Gorge. But in the meantime, margiesoutdoorstore.com and then Margie's Outdoor Store on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube.
Okay, fantastic. I've got the links in the description of the show, so if you guys want to visit that, go and click on that right after the show ends. Again, James, thank you so much. This was fantastic, and I'm looking forward to our next one, and I will be in touch for sure.
Awesome.
So, James, all the best to you. Everybody in the chat, all the best to you guys. Thank you so much for watching tonight. If you catch the replay, thank you guys as well. If you guys have questions for James, leave them even in the comments, and I'll see about getting them to him. And other than that, thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Thank you for watching. James, thank you again so much for your time and for your information and for the conversation tonight. This was incredible. And again, I am looking forward to our next one. So everybody, take it easy. Have a wonderful night and an even better tomorrow. I'll see you guys soon. All the best.
Thank you for having me.